In one of our projects at the Center for Collective Intelligence, we're collecting interesting examples of collective intelligence in new kinds of organizations. For instance, we've looked at examples like Wikipedia and Google and Innocentive and the community that created Linux. And we've looked at all these examples and tried to find the common patterns that occur over and over in these different examples. We've identified so far about 16 key design patterns that we call genes in these different examples. So in a certain sense, we're mapping the genomes of collective intelligence. For example, the community of people that created the Linux open source software system embody what we call the crowd gene, because anyone who wants to can contribute a module to that software system. But it also embodies what we call the hierarchy gene, because the final decisions about which of all the contributed modules to include in the final product are made by Linus Torvalds and a few of his friends. Some of the other genes we've identified are things like contests, where in Innocentive, for instance, numbers of people compete to see who can come up with the best solution to problems that companies have. Or prediction markets, where people buy and sell predictions of possible future events. Other genes include things like voting and averaging and consensus and so forth. One of the genes we've just identified recently is something we call hyper-specialization. That is, in cases where people are collaborating to do different pieces of a large project, we call that in general the collaboration gene, but we've identified a particular subtype of that we call the hyper-specialization gene, which means that more and more people will do more and more highly specialized parts of an overall project. And we think this gene, as many of the others we're studying, is likely to become much more common as information technology reduces the costs and the time needed to transmit information practically anywhere on the planet almost instantly. I think I want to do the hyperspecialization again. I don't remember exactly how I started that, but...
You said it was a subtype of the...
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Another gene we've recently identified is one we call the hyperspecialization gene. This is a subtype of a more general gene called the collaboration gene, where different people do different pieces of a bigger project. But in the hyperspecialization gene, people do very specialized pieces of the bigger project. We think this gene is likely to become much more common as information technology now makes it possible for information to be transmitted almost anywhere on the planet, almost instantly and almost free. So there's now much more scope for people to do highly specialized tasks for projects or things that are being done anywhere else on the planet. I think these new kinds of collective intelligence have huge implications for how businesses will be organized. For instance, I think we're now in the early stages of an increase in human freedom in business that may, in the long run, be as important a change for business as the change to democracies was for governments. The reason I think this is happening is because it's now possible for the first time in human history to have the economic benefits of very large organizations, things like economies of scale, and at the same time to have the human benefits of very small organizations, things like freedom, flexibility, creativity, and motivation. And the reason that's possible is because a new generation of information technologies, email, the World Wide Web, cheap long-distance telephone, etc., all these things enabled by the internet, are reducing the costs of communication to such a low level that it's now possible for huge numbers of people, even in very large organizations, to have enough information that they can make sensible decisions for themselves instead of just following orders from someone above them in a hierarchy who supposedly knows more than they do. So it's the technology, by reducing the cost of communication, that's making this freedom or decentralization of decision-making possible. But just because something's possible doesn't mean it will necessarily happen. What I think will actually drive the changes in this case are the business benefits of having more people making more decisions for themselves. The benefits, for instance, of having people more highly motivated, more creative, and more flexible. So let me try to tie it to the Arab Spring.
Doesn't have to, but I just
Okay.
thought.
Some people wonder whether the events in the Middle East recently, the events sometimes called the Arab Spring, whether these are examples of a kind of broader trend in collective intelligence. And I think absolutely they are. I think they are examples of how, as communication costs fall, it becomes possible for far more people to be involved in more decision-making than would otherwise be possible. In the case of the Arab Spring, this is playing itself out in government, and in some sense it is just continuing a trend that's been underway now for over 200 years toward more democracies in governments. I think it also reflects a trend that is playing itself out in businesses as well, a trend toward more democratic, more networked, more participative business organizations as well as government organizations.